Now we move on to the Middle East as the world marks the second anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attack. Gazans reflect on the events. Meanwhile, one displaced Palestinian man has said that the world should remember the motive behind the attack: 77 years of occupation, injustice, oppression, and displacement. He further pointed out to the imprisonments, killings, and destructions faced by Palestinians over decades. Let's listen into some of the Gazans.
اليوم 7 أكتوبر وإحنا الحمد لله عايشين في منعاناة وعايشين في غلب. إلنا سنتين بنعاني والله عالم في الحال. يعني هينا عجوز مش متحملة حمل النار، ولا في ورق ولا في إشي. يعني حياتنا صعبة للغاية، ولا أكل ولا شرب.
اليوم سنتين على 7 أكتوبر، على حرب 7 أكتوبر. يمكن النزوح السابع لنا تقريبا. معاناة على مدار السنتين، لا حياة صح، لا نظافة، تحت القصف بترحل، تحت الموت بترحل، بتشرد أخوك بتقطع، ما بتقدرش تشيله، جارك بياكل له صاروخ ما بتقدرش تشيله، مرتك ابنك ممكن يقع ما تقدر تشيله وانت تحت القصف شارد من مكان لمكان.
يعني اليوم سنتين كملات خلصنا في الحرب واحنا في شنشطة وفي تهجير وفي نزوح، والجيش من قدامنا هي ومن ورانا الجيش والدبابات، وصحينا على خبط وقصف وطخ وطيران، والبحر هيو أمامنا، لا في شي مفر.
Meanwhile, families of hostages are calling for the release of their loved ones on the second anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attack. At Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, visitors paused to remember the attack and share their stories of loss and hope. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dan Perry. He's a world affairs analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this second anniversary of this heartbreaking event that took place in 2023, for 2 years, it seems like we haven't had a breakthrough. The hostages are still in under Hamas, and we do not know if they will be able to come back. How hopeful can we be as the discussions go on in Egypt?
The region is clearly at a crossroads, and there's no reason not to be hopeful, other than the fact that there is no precedent for what is on the table, which is a jihadist movement agreeing to disarm. I think we're basically at a pivot point where if Hamas agrees to the point in the Trump 20-point proposal, that is that it disarm and hand over its weapons to an interim Palestinian technocratic government that will eventually be handed over to the Palestinian Authority, well, then a lot of good things will come. The war will end. Israel's hostages will be released. The Palestinian suffering will cease. A political and diplomatic horizon will start to unfold, and perhaps even one day again we'll be talking about negotiations on a Palestinian state. On the other hand, if Hamas does not disarm, I fear that Israel will have carte blanche to go ahead with its pre-existing plan to plow ahead and scale up its Gaza operations, headed towards the full takeover of the Strip, and the establishment of a military administration over the 2.2 million Gazans, and basically continued guerrilla warfare, insurgency with what remains of Hamas. And I think that is basically Israel walking into the trap that Hamas laid for it on October 7th, 2023. Hamas does not want a two-state solution. Hamas wants Israel to reoccupy the territories and for there to be one state with two ethnic groups bleeding each other to death forevermore. Hamas's goal is not partition, is not statehood for the Palestinians, is not the end of occupation, but the opposite of it. I'm not sure it would be so wise for Israel to do this, but I think that is where we're headed, and that is the current pivot point. And a lot depends on the degree to which the Arabs, and especially Qatar, Hamas's erstwhile funder and backer, can pressure them to acquiesce. And I think it needs to be remembered that 2 months ago, very usefully, 2.5 months ago, the Arab League joined the Western powers in calling on Hamas to disarm, and everything depends on this outcome.
And then, building on that, what steps can these Israel and Hamas and Palestinian Authority and other Arab nations and other negotiators who are involved in the negotiation now, can they take to address both perspectives and both the humanitarian and political dimensions of this conflict?
Look, if Hamas says no and Israel proceeds, I really don't know what can be done. I mean, I suppose at that point, humanitarian aid will go in assisting Israel in running the strip. I think more useful would be for Israel to not scale up its operations and for a whole new paradigm to be established where basically no reconstruction aid goes in, as opposed to the 100 billion that will probably go in if Hamas disarms, and the Palestinians are given some temporary refuge elsewhere, just as Ukrainians are allowed to flee Ukraine as long as the Russian attack continues. I think there's no choice but to find some way to let the Palestinians out. Maybe to the West Bank. Maybe Egypt can be compelled to take them in temporarily. If that happens, it must not be ethnic cleansing. It must be with guarantees that they can return whenever Hamas breaks. But I don't see anything good that can happen unless Hamas simply agrees to these terms. This Israeli government, I don't think will just give up. Certainly not considering that they seem to have the green light from Trump to proceed if Hamas says no. I see only a cataclysm if Hamas says no, and if the Arabs can't break their will, basically, and explain to them that no more funding, no more backing, no more legitimacy, nothing, unless they simply agree. Everything depends on this. If you ask me what the world can do if this fails, it's a bad situation. And about all I can say is what I did, let the Palestinians out of Gaza.
And since no one knows, or we do not know for certain that what would work for this situation with Gaza and Hamas and Israel, what do you think, what can they learn or we learn from the past accord, like Oslo Accords, or that hasn't worked for this and now the outcome is here?
So many things. The cardinal sin of the Oslo Accords is that they try to make it slow and deploy confidence-building measures over a prolonged period with a 5-year interim period that required the Israeli government to be reelected, the moderate Israeli government of Yitzhak Rabin, during that time, which invited every extremist on all sides to try to mess things up. And the number one extremist force was Hamas, that immediately began to try to kill Jews in order to move them to the right and cause the Rabin government to fall. And that is more or less what happened. Rabin was assassinated and Netanyahu came to power. Netanyahu is an enemy of partition, the same way as Hamas, different methods, but same outcome. They both want one state, and they both think the other can be somehow defeated in a civil war in that one state, or in Netanyahu's case, oppressed. Moreover, there are lessons on both sides as follows. Israel must end the settlements in West Bank. That was poison to the system that convinced so many Palestinians to support Hamas because they thought Israel was operating in bad faith. The settlements must immediately end, and if you ask me, the settlers that are beyond the current fence line, and that means settlers that are not very close to the old borders so that they could plausibly stay as part of a slightly altered map without being in Palestine, they must be removed. And that's about 80,000 Jewish settlers that are just standing in the way of any kind of a plausible new map that creates a partition between Israel and a Palestinian entity, call it a state, but it would have to be a demilitarized state. So the settlements must end. They're simply poison in the system. On the other hand, the Arab side, for too long, has tolerated these militias, armed militias, undermining the sovereignty of a swath of countries from Iraq to Lebanon, where you had Hezbollah also messing around in Syria, the Houthis in Lebanon. It's just a disaster. The militias in the Palestinian areas, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have badly undermined the Palestinian Authority, have made it impossible for Israel to truly have faith that Palestine won't attack them if they give up land and allow the creation of a quasi-state leading to a total state, because you have these militias. Israel absolutely gave up Gaza. They pulled out of Gaza completely. All troops, all settlers. Hamas took over in a coup against the Palestinian Authority, turned it into a garrison state, began immediately arming with weapons and long-range rockets and attack tunnels, and provoked Israel during a number of mini wars leading to the big one, whose goal it was to have a massive war where Israel reoccupies Gaza. You can't have these militias. And the Arab world messed around with this for way too long and allowed Iran especially to undermine the sovereignty of all these Arab countries. And I believe they now understand what a terrible mistake that was. And we see that these militias are becoming illegitimate now. And Lebanon is trying to disarm Hezbollah, or speaking about it at least. But they can only do this because Israel did them the favor of weakening Hezbollah a year ago in the war. The Arab League has called on Hamas, as I said before, to disarm. These are great strides forward. And what has to happen now is a movement from merely calling for this to making it happen, and it may have to be by force.
Yes. Dan, always great hearing from you, and thank you for that insightful look on and sharing that with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has said that U.S. President Donald Trump should receive the Nobel Peace Prize if he can convince China to abandon military threats against Taiwan. Speaking in an interview, the Taiwanese president highlighted President Trump's previous claim that Chinese President Xi Jinping has promised not to invade Taiwan during his term. Lai has urged Trump to stay vigilant, warning that Xi Jinping continues to ramp up military drills in the Taiwan Strait and expand Chinese forces across the East and South China Seas. President Lai has stated that if President Trump were to successfully persuade Chinese President Xi Jinping to permanently end military aggression towards Taiwan, he would undoubtedly deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. The comments come as President Trump prepares for a possible meeting with President Xi at an upcoming Asia-Pacific summit in South Korea. Hours after Lai's remarks were released, Taiwan's military reported a spike in Chinese activity after 23 aircraft and drones were seen patrolling near the island, accompanied by warships. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring